Well, welcome all attendees, sponsors, and exhibitors to the 2020 National Zero Waste Virtual Conference hosted by the National Recycling Coalition. My name is Leslie Lukash, and I'm on the board of the NRC and co-chair of this conference alongside my two esteemed co-conference chairs, Alec Cooley and Gary Liss. The National Recycling Coalition is a nonprofit organization focused on promoting and enhancing recycling throughout the United States. On behalf of the NRC, I'd like to express our gratitude for your attendance today, and we are so pleased to host you on this remote platform. Today's event has been 2 years in the making. Last March, NRC was in the final stages of planning an in-person National Zero Waste Conference in Berkeley, California on March 18th and 19th. But if you can remember what was happening back in March, we were all going through shelter-in-place orders, which happened right around the same time as our conference. So we quickly, as hosts, had to reimagine a whole new conference and put it on this virtual platform. And we really hope you enjoy this new conference over the next 3 days. We really appreciate you staying with us. And believe it or not, we've increased our total attendance by 100 people, so even more people will benefit from this conference. So the virtual conference is centered on a main theme, and today's theme is zero waste businesses. Tomorrow's theme is going to be zero waste communities. And the final theme is going to be the National Recycling Congress and Policy. So next slide. I'd like to just go over some housekeeping tips for you. And if you notice when you were in the exhibit floor, on the left-hand side, there's a Remo banner tip. And so you can go to that banner if you have any questions, or actually it's a video that will show you different tips of how to work the Remo system. It's very helpful. So when you are in the presentation slide mode, you can see the 4 arrows. Feel free to click on the 4 arrows. That will open up your screen. And if you want to close that screen and make it smaller, just go ahead and click it and it'll make it smaller. I also want to share with you just some functions that may be helpful throughout the day. You'll see the camera function, which is in the first arrow. You can turn your camera on and off, as well as your mic on and off when you are in the exhibitor floor setting. So that way, if you're at a table, you can chat and talk with people that are at the table with you. There's also a chat function. You can chat privately, one-on-one, by searching somebody's name in the participation mode, or you can just chat with everybody at your table, or you can chat with all attendees. And then lastly, in the chat function, you'll see a little paperclip. That paperclip allows you to share documents if you are in a conversation and something comes up where somebody wants to see some information that you may have from where you work. You can actually share that right on site through that, using that paperclip. Next slide. So when you're in presentation mode, you'll see the 3 functions, the chat, participants, and Q&A. I just wanted to quickly go over the Q&A function. This one's pretty neat. Make sure to only put your questions in the Q&A function. Do not put them in chat because they will not be seen, unfortunately. But when you put a question in the Q&A, there's actually an upvoting process. So if you can see the example of who is your favorite Beatle and do you know the way to San Jose, you can actually upvote them by a little arrow that's in the red circle right there. And if you feel like that question is really a question that you want to ask yourself, go ahead and upvote them. And that way, when moderators are moderating sessions, they can know which questions are most important. And if you're having any technical difficulties, we have a few ways to manage this. Look for the volunteers in the room. Their avatar is the same as the Zero Waste Conference logo, and their name volunteer will be next to that. Or you can stop by the help desk, and that's in the upper right-hand corner. Or you can search via chat. Type in volunteer, and the volunteers will come up in the chat box. And then lastly, click that Remo help button in the lower left-hand corner if if you can't find the help that you're searching for. Next slide. So leading up to today's conference, we actually had a series of webinars and you can see all the webinars that we hosted right there on your screen. If you didn't have a chance to see any of the webinars, they are all located on the NRC website, and they will also be put on the conference website as well. But these webinars and the next 3 days equal the full 32 hours that you would have received at the conference itself. Next slide. So I just wanted to go over today's agenda. We will have a session following this opening remarks, and then we'll break out into the exhibit hall. And then after exhibit hall, we'll continue into sessions. And then at 12:45, it will be the more exhibit hall, happy hour, NCRA players. NCRA stands for the Northern California Recycling Association, and every year they put on a fabulous skit with great wording and jargons that reflect the recycling industry. So I highly recommend you check them out. And then we'll close the day, and we'll close the Remo platform at 2 o'clock today. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our first welcome, which is from Dave Keeling. And Dave is our NRC's past president, as well as he was our president for 2.5 years. So Dave, I hand it over to you.
As Leslie mentioned, my name is Dave Keeling. I have the honor of serving as president of the National Recycling Coalition for the last few years. All right. With so many of our board members that are engaged in the zero waste industry, it was a natural fit for the NRC to bring this community together through this conference. As a former employee of the Steel Recycling Institute and a protege of Bill Heenan, I was thrilled that the NRC is able to bring back the virtual version of the National Recycling Congress on the 3rd day of this conference. Someday we hope to bring back the National Recycling Congress as an in-person event as well. As many as you know, and as Leslie mentioned, we were about a week away of hosting this conference as a live event in March when the COVID-19 restrictions were imposed on the Berkeley campus. The NRC committee, led by Gary Liss, Leslie Lukash, and Alex Cooley, they decided that there was too much valuable content organized for this conference just to cancel. So with the direction provided by our partners in the advisory committee, the switch to a virtual event was successfully implemented, as you'll see in the next few days. What I'd like to do is quickly express my gratitude to our sponsors. Our platinum sponsors are Recology, Zero Waste, Waxy, Paint Care. Our gold sponsors are the Recycling Partnership, Zero Waste Sonoma, Mattress Recycling Council, Mobius Intelligent Systems, Strategic Materials, Zanker Recycling, and Green Martin Technologies, in the California Resource Recovery Association, which is one of our state recycling affiliates. So it's a big hand for those. Next slide, please. These are our bronze sponsors, or excuse me, our silver and bronze sponsors. I'd also like to thank our partners. Next slide, please. Which is the Northern California Recycling Association. As Leslie mentioned, they'll have the players up later. The California Resource Recovery Association, Zero Waste USA, Zero Waste International Alliance, U.S. Green Building Council True Certification of Zero Waste, Zero Waste Campus Council, and the Cal Zero Waste. Next slide, please. I'd also like to thank our advisory committee, which were so important to moving this event to a virtual conference. You can see them listed here. Many of those folks are part of the partners that I mentioned earlier, and also a number of them are also NRC board members. So thank you for all your hard work and your guidance on making this a truly successful event. And next slide, please. And I also like to thank our organizers, who are the co-chairs of the NRC conference committee, as I mentioned, Alec Cooley, Leslie Lukash, and Gary Liss. I also like to express our thanks to our staff, Portia Sinat, Julia Gerber, Despina, Todd, Oren, and of course, Sarah D'Souza, who was our executive director for the last couple of years as well, while I was president. And then, of course, our cooperating organizations. You can see the coordinator, Amanda, volunteers, Alina, Jill, and Karen, and of course, the NRC Board of Directors. And last but not least, I want to express our gratitude for the many attendees who registered for the in-person event, and also our sponsors who did the same. and then were gracious enough to stick with us as we implemented this virtual. So thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to have a great conference and look forward to talking to you in the networking sessions. Thank you again. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Dave, for that welcome. Next, I'd like to introduce Sophie Hahn, the Vice Mayor of Berkeley. The city Thank you, David. Next, I'd like to introduce Sophie Hahn, the Vice Mayor of Berkeley. The City of Berkeley was the gracious original host of the in-person conference, so we appreciate the city's support in welcoming everyone to the virtual conference today.
Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you to all of you for your participation in this virtual event. I am very grateful to the National Recycling Coalition for organizing this conference and for inviting me to make a few opening comments. We were originally scheduled to meet at UC Berkeley, and I was looking forward to welcoming you all to our beautiful city and to the Cal campus. It was particularly meaningful because in Berkeley, we have a long history of innovating to meet environmental and zero waste challenges. We pioneered curbside recycling in the 1970s and banned styrofoam in the 1980s. One of the reasons that I ran for office was to build on the environmental progress we've made, and I'm very proud to be part of a whole team of elected officials and city staff with a deep commitment to this work. We've all seen the truly devastating images of turtles, birds, and other marine life engulfed in plastic debris and the Texas-sized Pacific Ocean garbage patch. And we've seen the plastic debris on beaches here at home and across the globe. A major source of this pollution is single-use disposable foodware, plastic plates, cups, lids, straws, clamshells, and other containers. These are manufactured from messy, environmentally damaging fossil fuels and then shipped and trucked halfway across the globe, all to be used once, briefly, and then thrown into our landfills and waterways, where they break down slowly for 1,000 years. All because somebody didn't want to wash a dish. Last year, working with Martin Bork of Berkeley's Ecology Center and a broad coalition of anti-plastics advocates, I was proud to author Berkeley's Single-Use Plastics and Litter Reduction Ordinance, unanimously adopted by the City Council, which sets forward the most comprehensive and far-reaching measures ever adopted to transition from plastic to reusable foodware. The goal of this legislation is not to substitute one throwaway product for another, but to move all the way from throwaway foodware to reusables. It's been very gratifying to see the legislation strike a chord here in the Bay Area and also across the globe, where we've had interest from San Francisco to as far away as Paris and Rome. I hope each of you will consider pushing for adoption of similar legislation wherever you live or work, so we can create a movement big enough to put a real dent in our mountains of plastic waste. My office is always open to help, and we would love to hear from you. Since COVID-19, there's been a sometimes well-meaning but woefully uninformed reaction to reusable bags and foodware. The plastics industry has exploited fears and uncertainty to falsely demonize reusables as potential contributors to coronavirus spread and push for the use of more and more plastic. We must push back against all efforts to roll back progress based on the pursuit of profit rather than public health and public good. More broadly, we must accelerate the fight to create an economy and a concept of personal and community well-being centered on the enjoyment of good company and quality reusable goods, and reject the heavily marketed idea that consumption and convenience somehow lead us to happiness. We need only look back a few decades to a time when this incredibly wasteful, and I believe personally unsatisfying, paradigm was unheard of. Durable, reusable items in prehistoric times, things as simple as shells and hollowed out stones, have served us well for millennia, and I know we can make them work again. Maya Angelou once said, "We may encounter defeats, but we must not be defeated." This is especially true in the midst of this global pandemic, one whose byproduct is another tsunami of medical, home delivery, and takeout food waste. We're in a moment of stall or maybe even backslide, and it's demoralizing. But no progress is ever linear. It goes in fits and starts. What's more important is the general thrust of our progress, and I feel very confident that a great deal of important work towards achieving zero waste continues to be done during this strange time. So take heart, go forth these next 3 days and do your important work to virtually cross-pollinate, redirect, reconnect with distant colleagues, meet new experts, exchange ideas, share, learn, and be inspired. With allies in the White House, friends and colleagues here in our virtual house, and growing momentum in our communities, it's time to tee up for the next great burst of progress. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Vice Mayor Sophie Hahn. I appreciate the words.
Thank you.
Thanks. So before we get started, I'd like to highlight one of our platinum sponsors. Thank you to Paint Care. Paint Care is a paint stewardship organization that operates 1,800 drop-off sites in 9 states for convenient recycling of paint. To learn more about how to use leftover paint or how to recycle the rest of your paint, visit paintcare.org. With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today, our first session, which Gary List will be moderating. Gary?
Thank you, Leslie. It's great to be here, and thank you all for participating. The title of our session is Circular Economy and Zero Waste Businesses. And we're starting with this because zero waste businesses are leading the way to zero waste and circularity. We've got 2 great examples of zero waste business here today and a leader in the issue of designing for zero waste. Before we begin with the presentations, I want to test your abilities with upvoting. So if you go to the chat, you'll see the list of webinars that NRC offered as part of the conference series. And we'd like you to type into the Q&A box the name of your favorite webinar and submit that, and then see how many people upvote for that particular webinar. You're all doing that. Just a couple of reminders that when the presentations are on the screen, you can expand them by clicking on the 4 arrows in the upper right corner of the slide to get them to be full screen in your equipment. If you need help on Remo, when you're back on the floor, go to the help desk in the top right corner of the first floor. Look for a volunteer via their avatar or icon, or search in the chat for, quote, volunteer, unquote. And now we'll take a look at how we're doing in the Q&A. And so far, implementing zero waste on campuses and in businesses is winning with a close second of diversity and inclusion. So you don't have to type out the whole name of the webinar, just enough so other people know what you're talking about. And it looks like a close horse race between campuses and diversity. So let's see who liked which of the sessions. There's 225 in the room, and there's only about 60 voting so far. So let's see if we can at least get to the amount of people participating as recently participated in the presidential election. So with that vote going on, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Joseph Button. He's been the Sustainability Director at Strauss Family Creamery since 2016. They achieved a true gold certification for zero waste in 2019, and he's worked in sustainability for more than 10 years. Now, here's Joseph.
Hello, everybody. What a great pleasure it is to be here today virtually and to share this Zero Waste Conference with all of you. Today, I'm going to talk about Strauss Family Creamery's Zero Waste journey. In 2019, we achieved Zero Waste True Gold certification. And today, I'm just going to outline what that means for Strauss Family Creamery, in addition to explaining our philosophy and ambition behind Zero Waste. Please go ahead. So by quick way of background, Strauss Family Creamery is a Northern California-based dairy company, and we are a mission-based dairy company. We exist to sustain the livelihoods of organic dairy farmers in our region of the world. And that makes us a little bit unique because our focus is outside of our four walls. We're very happy to deliver delicious dairy products to our community. But at the end of the day, we exist to make sure that dairy farmers can continue to thrive. Next slide, please. So our zero waste philosophy at Strauss Family Creamery begins with the man seen in this picture here, Albert Strauss, the CEO and founder of Strauss Family Creamery, and by morning and evening, a dairy farmer of his own. And organic farming is really the base of our zero waste philosophy. As you see there, there's a small quote that says that organic farming has practices that encourage the cycling of on-farm resources. And that's really the core principle behind what we're doing, is cycling our resources, our materials, getting maximum use out of them. And that really begins with the philosophy of organic farming. Next slide, please. And this is shown on a dairy farm when you look at manure. All materials have potential value. And what you're looking at here in this picture is a big pile of dry manure. While many people might see manure as a gross societal ill, in reality, it is the source of a nutrient-rich compost that can yield economic benefits. Next slide. When you take that manure and you apply it to open pastures, what you end up with is nutrient-dense, rich forage for animals. That really helps the farmers grow more feed on their farm, as opposed to having to buy it outside from far away. Next slide. So when we take those principles from the farm and translate them to the creamery where we make the products, we have to really set a standard. And that first thing that we set is the idea of making our word choices matter. We choose to manage materials at Strauss Family Creamery, not waste. Next slide. So what is zero waste? There's a lot of discussion about this. Everybody at this table at this conference understands in principle what zero waste is. I put the ZWIA definition here. That's something that we use as a guiding framework. For us at Strauss, we're just constantly working towards using materials that have actual value in the re-economy and have minimal life cycle environmental impacts. That means every material that we bring into our doors, we're making sure and hoping that we can use it in the recycling framework downstream. At the same time, we're trying to source materials that have minimal life cycle impacts upstream. And in practice, we are diverting over 92% of our materials that we manage away from landfill. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to look at what zero waste certification looks like at Strauss. Next slide. I'm going to run through a bunch of these examples. So our true waste journey started 3 years ago when there was a webinar about this certification, and I said, we need to get there. And we had, at the time, around an 80% diversion rate away from landfill, and we needed to gain 10 points. And so we put the irons to the fire and started diverting like crazy and measuring like crazy so that we could achieve that certification. And I just want to put a personal challenge out there to every food manufacturer or business that's in attendance today. This is a certification that you should pursue and is achievable. 90% is challenging, but it's not a bar that's too hard that you can't achieve it. So really consider joining the fold of true zero waste businesses. Next slide, please. So we have two facilities. We have a creamery where we make dairy products, and we also have an office and warehouse. Together, we're managing around 75,000 square feet of floor space and over 1 million pounds of material each year. Both of our facilities are certified gold under the True Zero Waste scheme, and both have a diversion rate over 90%. Together, it's around 92%. Next slide, please. And we love to count our waste. We have a giant Excel tracker that tracks waste flows in around 20 categories every month. And my partner in crime is in the attendance today, Beatrix Scolari. She manages this spreadsheet, and it's a true effort of love and attention. We count every material that we're managing in this facility. Again, that's over 1 million pounds. Next slide. So you might be wondering, how do we get great accounting? Well, we suit up to 4 times per year. This year's been a little different with COVID. And we dumpster dive, which means we go into our garbage dumpsters and recycling dumpsters, and we pull everything out, collect it in categories, and weigh it. And that's how we get a very accurate assessment of what we're sending to our partner in the waste management business, Recology. Next slide, please. And then again, we do more accounting. We take that information that we get from our dumpster dives and we divide it by the total amount of material, and we get to that 92% level. So let's look at some of the factors that go into that 92% diversion rate. Next slide. And go ahead and jump to organic waste. The very first one, yeah, there you go, is sending our organic waste from the creamery to a nearby dairy where that organic waste is converted in a methane biodigester and turned into renewable electricity. And that's a significant amount of our waste diversion. Instead of having scrap yogurt go into dumpsters or into a wastewater treatment facility where it takes a lot of energy to process, we're sending our organic waste to a nearby dairy where it is very passively captured and converted into biogas and then into renewable electricity that powers the entire farm. Next slide. We also have a circular packaging model. For those of you who are fans of Strauss Family Creamery, you probably know this well, but we deliver milk to retail in reusable glass bottles. And this glass bottle program has been going on for 25 years, and we have a 75% reuse rate for these glass bottles. It's something we're very proud of. And later today, if you wouldn't mind, join me at my table topic. I'll be diving into this topic later. Next slide, please. We also have a packaging strategy for our non-milk lines that is helping us define the roadmap to sourcing what we would like to consider zero waste materials for the future. Plastic yogurt cups is something that we're not satisfied with. So we are scouring the world to try to find new materials that will allow us to retain zero waste for all of our packaging lines, not just glass bottles. Next slide. Source reduction. We work with our suppliers to also use zero waste solutions. So recently, our paper collars that go on our glass bottles, we switched vendors to a vendor in nearby Santa Rosa. And instead of shipping those paper collars in corrugate boxes, when we started our new relationship with this vendor, we said, you know what, let's set up a circular transport mechanism, these plastic crates, so that we don't have to source new fiber and can just use these crates for essentially forever in delivering the paper collars to our creamery and then back to the vendor. It's a great solution. Next slide. We also have guidelines for sustainable purchasing, and every major purchaser in our company follows these guidelines. And I wish you could read them because it's very inspiring and helpful, but everybody at Strauss Family Creamery is dedicated to being a part of the zero waste solution, especially those folks who are charged with purchasing materials. Next slide. We recycle a lot of materials every year. Over 350,000 pounds go directly to recycling or into our recycling dumpster. Mixed recycling, corrugate, milk caps, and shrink wrap are our biggest items that end up in that stream. It's a secret. You can send your milk cap back with the bottle. We collect them and then we send them directly to a recycler because we're able to aggregate all of those small pieces of plastic and get them to a recycling facility. Next slide. We help our team analyze the results. Our operations team, we send them quarterly or biannual reports that say this is how you're doing in waste management at the creamery, at the warehouse. And they use this guide to help continually improve the processes and zero waste at our plant. And then finally, next slide, it's really our employees that are the secret ingredient to achieving this. Zero waste for any business is an all-in strategy. It requires everybody from our line workers to our CEO to buy into this philosophy so that together we can achieve such a great diversion rate. I'm not sure how much time I have left, but I can run through some examples unless we want to transfer to the next speaker.
Got another couple minutes.
Okay, great. So let me just look at a couple business cases of things we do. Zero waste can save money. So that's a very important thing to do. You know, it requires a new philosophy of how you're going to manage materials, but it can also support the bottom line of a business. So let's look at the next slide. One of the solutions that we implement at Strauss is to use reusable pallet wraps. So instead of wrapping our pallets of crates and bottles, we can, with shrink wrap, a plastic source, we can wrap them with these reusable pallet wraps, and we actually send these to our primary milk distributor, and they send them back. And because we're able to use these, not only do our employees save time from avoiding running around the pallets with a roll of shrink wrap, we're also reducing costs significantly from having to buy that shrink wrap year in and year out. It only takes around 1 year to get an economic payback from implementing this solution. It's a great zero waste strategy. Next slide. Reducing your garbage service. So we are so proud to be partners with Recology. They have a zero waste advisor that we are on the phone with constantly to help assess our needs and to right size our service. When you start diverting 90% of your materials away from landfill, guess what? You save money because you can right-size your containers, remove containers, and you can save on the bottom line there. We are opening a brand new creamery next year, and I'm excited because we are starting with only one waste dumpster for an entire creamery that's around 50,000 square feet of floor space. And that's just a testament to our relationship with Recology and to the zero waste philosophy that we've adopted. Next slide. So not only does Strauss have reusable glass bottles, but we also have reusable transport packaging. I don't think anybody really thinks about this, but the milk crate is kind of an original gangster when it comes to the reusable economy. All of our glass milk bottles go in these crates, and the crates go out to the distributor, they go to the grocery store, and they find their way back. We have an over 99% return rate for our milk crates, and that helps us reduce the use, otherwise what would be cardboard or corrugate, and it really works well in the system. Less plastic, more trees, good economics. It's a great solution. And so that concludes my presentation. You know, today I'd be happy to talk with any of you who are interested in pursuing a zero waste business strategy. It can be done. We've done it, and we want to invite you to join the team and make a real difference for zero waste and for our environment. Thank you.
Fantastic, Joseph. Thanks for your presentation and your leadership. We've got one question about certification, which was answered in the chat, in the Q&A box, with a link to true.gbci.org.
Great.
The other question is, could you talk a little about how you engage with suppliers to get them on board with co-evolving with Strauss to a circular economy model?
Sure. Yeah, so this is really important. It all starts with engagement with the suppliers. We have standards, and we let our suppliers know what those standards are. Sometimes they're not achievable. But our suppliers know what our goals and ambitions are. And what we do is we invite them to say, here's where we want to go, and we need you to help us get there. So as our supplier, not only are you providing us with goods and materials, you're helping us look to the future so that we can have a greater zero waste economy. So most of them know that. We meet with them in the conversation. I'm often in the meeting with our purchasing manager. And so that's how we engage. Sometimes it's easier than not, but having that conversation and having the standards so that our suppliers know what to expect from us as a buyer is really the first step in getting there. It's a great question.
Great. We've got a number of other questions now in the Q&A. We'll get to those in the general Q&A. We're going to go on to our next speaker now. If we can bring up Mandy McKay. Mandy is the Sustainability Manager for Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. Both of Sierra Nevada's brewing facilities are certified platinum zero waste through True, and the company has been recognized as an industry leader in sustainability. Here's Mandy.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak this morning. I'm thrilled. I love sharing this part of our story. I've been with Sierra Nevada working in sustainability for over 12 years. And I really cut my teeth on zero waste, and it's really where our whole kind of sustainability and CSR efforts began. So again, I'm thrilled to talk to everybody. I'm just going to share a little highlight of our program and our history and what zero waste means to us, and how we're doing our best to kind of reach the circular economy goals that we're all trying to achieve. Next slide, please. So I'll start off with just a brief history. So Sierra Nevada was founded in 1980 by Ken Grossman here in Chico, California. I start off talking about Ken and our founding because this is really where our values around sustainability and zero waste really began. So Ken is an outdoors person. He's a nature lover. He's an environmentalist at heart. He understands inherently the importance of resource conservation, efficiency, and zero waste, really before anyone was talking about zero waste. Next slide. As we've continued to grow, those values have really built the foundation of who we are as a company and the culture. So now we're much larger. And the next slide, please. But we are still owned and operated by Ken and his family. And so that kind of helps. Similar to Strauss, it really started with kind of this visionary and this person, and who has now built this company that really stands for the things that we believe in. Ken's, as I mentioned, his family is now heavily involved in leading the company, and we're still privately owned by them, which makes a big difference. We can think long term. We're not beholden to shareholders or external stakeholders. It's the family, so they can decide and think about things differently, generationally, long term. And again, I think a lot of that really is embedded in all the decisions that we make as a company, including sustainability and zero waste. Next slide. So just a quick snapshot of kind of who we are currently. So we're the 3rd largest craft brewer in the country, 10th largest brewery overall. As I mentioned, we're still independent and family owned, which is kind of rare these days. I feel really fortunate. We've got right about 1,000 employees, 2 breweries. So again, our headquarters in Chico, California, and then we have a second brewery facility out in North Carolina, right outside Asheville. We're certainly considered a pioneer in the craft brewing industry, being around as long as we have and helped driven kind of what craft beer is today. And then also a leader in sustainability. So I'm going to talk more about that. Next slide. So when I talk about zero waste, it really is a piece of the larger and broader strategy that we have around sustainability and corporate social responsibility. So, this is a very standard, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the triple bottom line, which is good. I hope most businesses are thinking along these lines these days. But we really do think about the environmental, social, and economic needs of our business as one decision, right? All three have to be in balance for something to thrive and be sustainable. So you can see zero waste is a key piece of that, but it's embedded in this broader strategy. And then the closed loop philosophy that I have mentioned there, I'm going to have several examples of that, and I feel that that's where we've done a really good job exhibiting this idea of, it's not waste, it's a resource. Joseph mentioned this as well. So we have lots of examples where we have something leaving a system or a process that we can bring back in either to the same process or to something else. So closing that loop, really driving that kind of circularity and that mindset into zero waste. Next slide. Our zero waste philosophy is really founded on the Zero Waste International Alliance principles and fundamentals. So if you're not familiar with them, ZWIA is the acronym there, but really that hierarchy that probably most of us know, but really, it's founded on the principles that you can look into those there, and so is the true certification. So if you're interested in going for that certification or learning more about it, is also based on the ZWIA principles, which again align very well with our values as a company and how we think about zero waste as a whole. So we were actually the first platinum certified business through TRUE. It actually was the U.S. Zero Waste Business Council prior to being TRUE. So I'm really proud of that back in 2013. And then our second brewery achieved that platinum certification level as well in 2016. We track our zero waste 2 ways, and waste is part of our broader KPI strategy. So we've got lots of key performance indicators that we're looking at on a monthly basis. So our management teams are looking at things like utilities and resource consumption, overtime, glass loss, all kinds of things. And waste is part of that. So we look at it 2 ways. We look at a diversion rate, which Joseph mentioned. We currently have a 99.6% diversion rate. Again, we're really proud of that, and we've worked really hard over the last decade to get there. But then we're also looking at it a second way. We're looking at waste generation overall. So whereas diversion is looking at how much you are not sending to the landfill, which is great, we also, again, following that hierarchy, we really want to put the focus on reducing waste to begin with. So even if it is something that's recyclable or compostable or reusable, that's great, but really did we need to generate it in the first place? So that second metric that we look at is overall waste generation. Doesn't matter where it ends up, but how much waste did we have to, handle or deal with? So we currently are looking at it in terms of pounds per barrel. So everything in the brewing industry is by barrel of beer. That's the metric we use. So right now we've got a target there for about 5 pounds per barrel. And that's something that every year we lower that target to see, to keep that continuous improvement and drive that number down. Again, it's great to divert from the landfill, but maybe we don't need to be producing all that cardboard or that glass or aluminum cans that we then have to find a way to recycle. Next slide. Joseph also mentioned this as well, and he's absolutely right. So the only way you have a successful zero waste program at a business like ours is that employee engagement. So we have a lot of touch points with employees when it comes to kind of embedding that zero waste culture in their role. Starts at day 1 with new employee orientation and onboarding. So they go through a whole sustainability kind of overview of our program, what's expected of them, how zero waste plays into that. We also have a Zero Waste 101 training. Bigfoot is our sort of unofficial mascot. So Bigfoot is there and you sort through trash with Bigfoot. And so that training kind of is embedded throughout the year and specifically with new employees as well. We've started a couple processes to further that reduction and really diving into why are we generating waste in the first place. So something like the excess and obsolete process. That's looking at anything that we did have to recycle or get rid of breweries. So maybe we had to dump a bunch of beer for some reason, or we had a lot of excess packaging material that we never used. Why? Did we order too much? Was there a quality concern? Was there an accident? What happened? Again, going into that kind of root cause analysis to really understand what led to that waste generation. Next slide. I'll just go through a couple highlights of that hierarchy. So I'll start with reduce. We've got small and big examples, so I'll just talk about a few. On the small scale, but again, everything adds up. Things like burlap. We get some of our specialty hops and ingredients in burlap sacks. That's not a recyclable material, but we've been fortunate to build some good partnerships with beekeepers who love burlap and they use it in their systems. So, finding creative outlets within your community is a great way to, keep something out of the landfill, reuse it, reduce that waste. Even something like reusing packaging material. A lot of times we have excess, as I mentioned, or the graphics change, or we don't make that beer anymore. So we're able to reuse that packaging material as packing material to ship things out to our sales team or to people that buy things from the gift store. So instead of peanuts or bubble wrap, things that are not recyclable once it gets to whoever it's going to, we can use old packaging material. Just a great way to reuse something and send something out into the world that is able to be recycled and not trash. And then of course, employees are started off pretty quickly in that getting that zero waste habit going in their personal life with something like a reusable bag and a container. Next slide. Some bigger examples of this, and Joseph touched on this as well. We do use reusable plastic pallets for most of our incoming packaging materials, things like cans and bottles. All those pallets come in, they get offloaded and then go right back to the manufacturer. And then we've also invested a long time ago in rail infrastructure to rail in all of our barley malt. Using the rail as opposed to trucks is a huge investment into zero waste. Rail is way more efficient than trucking for something like bulk malt, especially when it comes to packaging. So we can just rail in a whole rail car of barley malt, unload it into our facility directly into tanks, rather than it being in super sacks or bags or containers that then have to find somewhere to go. So there's no packaging. So investing in the rail is a huge investment into waste reduction and efficiency. Next slide. On traditional kind of recycling end of things, I like to joke that we kind of run a little mini MRF at our breweries. So we have lots of source separation, which is why we're able to divert this much waste from the landfill, is that we take the time to source separate. We've got probably 25 different bins for things and every material that you can possibly imagine. But as we know, that if you take the time to source separate and you're able to collect things in bulk, large volumes, you're more often able to get it recycled. So even things that are typically a little bit hard, like PET strapping or super sacks, things like that aren't recyclable necessarily in a curbside program, but if you can bale it, collect it in bulk, source separate, much higher chance to get that diverted. Next slide. One of the biggest, the most recent investment into zero waste, but it was about 10 years ago now, was composting. And I'm going to talk about on-site composting at my table topic if you're interested. So I'll talk about our hot rock composting machine. So we are composting all of our food waste and some spent brewing materials on site at the brewery. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about that at the table topic, but that's one of my favorite examples of closing the loop. So I'll kind of go through several highlights of our closed loop examples. Next slide. And this is where I think we've done a really good job over the years of thinking about this. So I mentioned composting. We're composting all that material on site in our hot rot, and then we're using all that compost on site in our own fields where we're growing fruits and vegetables and herbs for our restaurants, and also some hops and barley. So again, closing that loop, keeping all of that on site and handling all that waste. Next slide. Got several more great examples of closed loops. Water is another big one. So in North Carolina, where it rains all the time, we've installed these beautiful rainwater cisterns to collect rainwater. We use all that water for toilet flushing and irrigation. And then we've done some really great water reuse loops in our packaging line. Both of those have saved about 500,000 to 2 million gallons of water a year. So just some simple water recovery loops really go a long way in a brewery where you're using a lot of water. Next slide. One of my also favorite loops that we have here at both of our breweries is on-site wastewater treatment. So we're collecting all of our wastewater from the brewing process, treating it in an anaerobic digester, and then using the methane from that digestion process to fuel our boilers or microturbines. So that's essentially making energy from wastewater. One of my favorite closed loops, and again, something that we've implemented at both of our breweries. Next slide. Another great example of closed loop is CO2. So we generate a lot of CO2 from fermentation. We collect all that CO2 and reuse it throughout the plant. If we weren't doing that, we'd have to purchase truckloads of CO2. So again, makes a lot of sense to capture something that's a byproduct and reuse it throughout the brewery for other needs. Next slide. And last but not least, biodiesel is one of my also favorite closed loop examples. So we do generate a lot of waste vegetable oil from our restaurant. We collect all that waste vegetable oil, turn it into biodiesel that can then go into any of our beer delivery trucks or farm equipment, anything with a diesel engine. We're making about 50 to 100 gallons of biodiesel a month. And again, keep all that on site. Otherwise, that would be a waste stream that we'd have to haul off site, pay to have it disposed of and properly handled. So again, might as well close that loop and use that resource. Next slide. We do a lot of advocacy, but I'm going to kind of skip that now. But just so you know that we do try to extend these values that we have externally. It's really important, right? Because if you can change all you want inside your four walls, but if you aren't actively promoting your values externally and helping change the region or the country, then that's sort of the next step. And we're doing a lot more there, which is great these days. Next slide. I think that's it. So if you want to learn more about kind of some of these closed loops and a lot that I did not have time to cover, you can go on the website and we've got these great interactive maps and you can kind of take a virtual tour throughout the brewery and look at a lot of the things I talked about and then several things that I didn't. And I think that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Mandy. Fantastic program. You highlighted that you were one of the first in the world to be recognized for that leadership, and glad to see the latest developments today. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A. We'll start with just one for now. How does Sierra Nevada communicate your success in zero waste to other businesses?
That's a good question. I do spend a lot of time, and my team spends a lot of time. We're very open to helping people on this journey because, again, we've been doing it a long time. We've been working on zero waste specifically and then growing our sustainability program for about 15 years. So we're happy to be a mentor or provide guidance or insight or resources, share what we've learned. So we do that pretty informally or through things like this. A lot of times I'll speak and give a presentation about our work. But yeah, it's usually we're open to helping. We do share some of it on our website, but we're always willing to help people that are just getting started or even businesses that are on their way. And we're still learning. I took notes during Joseph's presentation of things I'm going to ask him about. So pretty informal, but we're certainly open to sharing and networking and collaborating with others.
Great. One last question. Did Sierra Nevada need to get any special approval and or jump through any hoops with health departments for the on-site gardens and or composting programs?
Great question. I'll talk more about it at the table topic. Because we are not selling any of that compost that we're making externally, we're not giving it away, we're not selling it, it's all staying on site. We were exempt from a lot of those kind of health regulations. We still have to meet temperatures. They're still looking at things like pathogen reduction and those types of things. But we're removed from having any kind of permit or some of those other things that I know that is a big hurdle for a lot of composters. Great question.
Great. Again, thank you so much, Mandy. Now we're going to introduce Claire Mifflin. Claire is an architect and systems thinker with over 20 years of experience designing the built environment to enable regenerative and circular urban systems. Claire led the development of the Zero Waste Design Guidelines for the American Institute of Architects New York chapter, is co-chair of their Committee on the Environment, a board member of Biomimicry New York City, and volunteers with New York City composting advocacy groups. Here's Claire.
Hi, how are you? Thank you, Gary. So yes, as Gary said, the development of the Zero Waste Design Guidelines through the AIA in New York with support from the Rockefeller Foundation, along with Foodprint Group, a Zero Waste Food Service consultant, and Closed Loops LLC, who led the urban design and collection side. So these guidelines really show how design of buildings and urban places plays a critical role in supporting city zero waste goals. Many people think zero waste operations is all about behavior and education, and of course this is important, but designing a building to facilitate zero waste operations makes it so much easier. I noticed, as Sophie Hahn said this morning, we used disposables because someone didn't want to wash a dish. But what if they had thousands of dirty dishes a day and the architect hadn't designed dishwashers into their kitchen? Next. So I'm an architect and I was focused on designing for zero energy or zero water, like this building in the foreground of the photo here with the sloped green roof for the New York City Parks Department. It was designed to capture sunlight for power. It's all electric building with solar panels and ground source heat pumps. It collects rainwater for irrigating the green roof, and then excess stormwater goes into an intertidal wetland. So we really thought about designing for circular resource flows in terms of energy and water, but not with materials. And that's both the materials that make up the building and the materials which flow through it daily and are hauled away as waste. And that's pretty typical for architects. Next, it wasn't until I moderated a panel on New York City starting to collect residential organic waste and asked what I should do in the 75-unit affordable housing project I just worked on. We had 3 chutes for trash and the 2 recycling streams we have in the city, but there were no good answers as to how I could incorporate organics. Nobody liked organics chutes. And here in New York City, organic waste is collected in small handheld 32-gallon bins. So putting a bin at the bottom of the chute didn't make any sense. And putting one in the waste room meant they had to be well ventilated and serviced daily. So then the 3 chutes would no longer be saving the labor, which was why they were put there in the first place. Next. So this really made me think that it was a difficult problem and every architect wasn't going to figure it out by themselves. So I started visiting many buildings to see how the inconsideration of architects to think about waste made everything so difficult for waste operations. I started with the building I'd designed. Cardboard can't go down a chute, and there was no space allocated to collect it, so it blocks the entry to the boiler room. Glass goes down the chute, and there's no interlock, so when the container at the bottom is swapped out, it sometimes hits the floor and smashes. And then there was no space to set out the waste on the sidewalk, as you can see on the right-hand photo. So it fills a large tree pit, which we're done for stormwater infiltration, but just frustrating the people who have to manage the waste daily. And the routes are often circuitous, as shown on the left, increasing labor. So the list went on, and it really made me realize what daily frustrations we were causing and what did it mean to design for zero waste. Next. The Zero Waste Design Guidelines answer that question really broadly. They give the context and specific strategies for designing buildings for zero operational waste. They consider the circular economy of building materials and collection and urban design strategies, many case studies and policy recommendations. Some sections are New York specific, as noted here, but the core is applicable anywhere. Next. So these core strategies in designing for zero operational waste fit into 4 sections. Strategies to reduce the waste generated in a building, strategies to effectively separate waste, planning for the movement of the materials through the building, and then incorporating equipment to reduce the volume of waste. Next. So waste reduction strategies are the most important, and they include reducing food waste, for example here by having smaller buffet pans, and reusable dishware. As Joe said earlier, Strauss don't want to include materials that have no value once discarded, and that means most single-use packaging. So are there enough dishwashers to accommodate dishwashing in site? How are the dishes collected and moved to them? That's all design. And here in Midtown Manhattan on the right, in the Hearst Tower, real estate in the restaurant is so expensive, they didn't want to give any of it up for dishwashing. So there's actually a 3-story dish carousel in a narrow slot that takes the reusable dishes down to a dishwashing space in the cellar. So that needs to be designed in at the beginning of a project. Next. Space also needs to be provided to store food donations, especially those that need to be refrigerated. And then accommodating space to track waste, especially in multi-tenant buildings, allows any financial incentives, again, like Joe was talking about how much they saved on their hauling bill, these can be passed through to the actual tenant in the space that is reducing the waste. So this is a big Vornado building in Chicago, one of the biggest in the world, where they track the waste of every tenant by using that floor scale. Next. Waste diversion strategies include having clear visual cues and signage at equal convenience waste stations. And it's great if they have opportunities for feedback, such as this one here at Etsy, which is a true Platinum Zero Waste certified facility that was designed for zero waste. Etsy got the designers involved at the beginning, and they really talked with them about how design would help zero waste operations. So here in the waste station at the left, you can see that it displays the diversion rate, here 86.9%, alongside the waste station, which helps change behavior. And the reason they can do that is because housekeeping staff take that bag out of the waste station, which has an integrated scale, and then they tap that tablet saying what type of material it was, and they have software, which is open source, I believe, that calculates that diversion rate, and it's put up each week. Next. You also saw they had those bus trays for reusables, and that waste station was behind this pantry, which is full of unpackaged snacks, drinks on tap. They have coffee and kombucha, and additional reusables for staff to go out and get coffee in the neighborhood. And they bring those back and put them in that bus tray. Next. And so just looking at a floor plan here, you can see that the waste stations are in red, distributed across the plan, and there's no mixed waste bins provided at all. Next. So a food service facility really needs to decide early on what type of dishware it will use. A product designer told me waste stations have 2 seconds to communicate to the user what goes where. And that's a tall order when they're both compostables and recyclables. You know, knowing plastic recyclables look just like plastic compostables, and is paper plastic lined or is it compostable? And that depends on who the hauler is. So it's really confusing with the mix of materials that's so common. Next. I mean, it's a great improvement if you move to all compostables. It makes it much simpler to sort. And in this case, we show an aluminum can too, because that's pretty obvious to most people. But many haulers don't accept all the compostables, and they have little value in the compost process. And then there's issues with contamination, just recently with the PFAS chemicals. Next. So really using reusables, as I'm sure most people would agree here, is the best solution, but we have to, and the best fit for the circular economy, but really making sure waste stations accommodate reusables is a design issue. And that's the topic of my tabletop breakout today. So if anybody's interested in that, please join me. Next. So once we've designed to reduce waste and facilitate diversion, the next thing is designing for waste movement through the building, so that the people who manage waste can ensure that segregated waste stays separate and it can be moved hygienically and safely. For this, a designer needs to know how much waste of each type is likely to be generated. And for a new building or client, that information might not be available. Obviously, for an existing client, you can do an audit, and that's more accurate. Next. So we developed this online waste calculator. You put in basic data for residential or commercial and different type of products. It's based on New York City waste data for residential, but Cal Recycle Californian data for commercial. Next. And you can adjust those sliders for waste generation rates, that's not showing, that's up above, or capture rates if you know that you're reducing a lot of materials or using reusables. Next. And then probably most helpful for the designer, once you've chosen the containers there at the bottom, it gives you a storage area, which is just a footprint of those containers. But it also suggests waste reduction equipment. And if you click them, you'll see how much the volume, the footprint of the storage area will be reduced. Next. And the guidelines give more information about those equipment that can reduce the volume of waste, from balers to organic waste treatment. Next. And then there are many options there, all with different implications for facility design. I mean, it's very different to design for food waste when it's ground into a slurry and held in a holding tank and picked up by a tank truck, compared to food waste being dewatered, put in an in-vessel composter and reused on site. So that needs to be designed in the beginning of a project too. Next. So we have infographics which show all the best practice strategies together and make it easier for architects to see, say I'm designing a food service building, which of the strategies I need to use, and there's more information on each of them keyed in. Next. We also look at the implications of collection methods and impacts on the urban environment. So many of the trucks actually on our city streets are delivering materials like single-use packaging that will soon become waste, or food that may become waste, or collecting waste. So reducing waste also has a large amount of impacts on the number of diesel trucks on city streets. And then it makes smaller micro haulers make more sense. Like in New York City, we have a lot of compost haulers that pick up by bike and compost locally. And if we could scale that up, we could get rid of a lot of garbage trucks and reuse the compost locally. Next. We also look at construction materials, which includes circular economy principles, such as ensuring full use of spaces, reducing material consumption, considering maintenance and disassembly, and future reuse, as well as what is commonly considered, which is reducing waste actually produced on a construction site. Next. We explored this topic in last month's panel with the AIA San Francisco collaboration. It's part of a series to start the development of zero waste design resources for the Bay Area, and we're currently looking for funding to develop that guidance. Next, and this is the last slide. So since the zero waste design guidelines were issued in 2017, I've kind of got obsessive with waste and stopped working as an architect, and I'm working on furthering them full time. With Footprint Group, I've been consulting with developers about how they can best apply these strategies. I've been working with Google to compile zero waste design guidance for their new buildings in the Bay Area, and setting up a nonprofit Center for Zero Waste Design to collaborate with other cities to bring zero waste design guidance to their city, such as Bay Area, and we're also collaborating with entities in Hong Kong and Singapore. And closer to home, working to develop a plan for New York City to see how organic waste collection and processing could be affordably incorporated into streets and open space. Because with COVID, New Yorkers have really realized what a waste it is to use our valuable sidewalk space, stacking up piles of garbage bags and attracting rats, when we could reduce, containerize, and process more locally. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Excellent presentation. And as everyone probably saw from the presentation, design is really critical. If we know we want to go to zero waste, we need to start designing for that, both in terms of our policies, our programs, our buildings, and do things that will reinforce moving in that direction. We have a couple of questions for you, and we have about 15 minutes left for the whole group. So I'm going to ask this one from Chuck Muir. What is the best way to get zero waste design incorporated into new projects or substantial remodel projects with local planning departments, project architects, LEED green building certification? How do you suggest is the most effective way of proceeding?
Well, the design guidelines themselves are a resource that can be shared with any architectural design team. And here in the city, we actually got funding to go out from the Department of Sanitation to go out to architects and developers' offices and give us education session to the architects. Also some project assistance on particular projects. I am working with LEED to try and get them to develop their guidance and, you know, for one, consider organics as a recyclable stream that has to be designed for. And also working with the AIA has a framework for design excellence and getting that to incorporate design for zero operational waste. So I would say send the architects to the guidelines, and if it's policy, you know, work with the local AIA chapter on that is a good way to start. Great.
So now we're going to do the general Q&A for the next 15 minutes. Most popular question of the day is, how many times does a reusable pallet wrap need to be used to make up for the greater production costs in terms of greenhouse gases? And does true certification take life cycle analyses into account? So I assume that was for Joseph. I believe you're the one who mentioned that in the beginning. Let me know if I need to read that again. Or
no, I've got it, Gary. I'm not able to answer that question in terms of the greenhouse gas life cycle impact. We do GHG life cycle assessments on many of the materials that we bring into our facility, especially our packaging materials, but the pallet wraps isn't one of them that we've conducted. Just on a basic economics situation, it takes us around 100 uses to recover the cost of those pallet wraps, which we achieve anywhere between half a year and a full year of time.
Oh, great. That last piece is a really good point about it. Next question is, have you done a cost analysis of all your environmental measures and looked at the return on investment? How does it compare with what is done in the industry? And does this motivate others in your industry to mimic you? That's from Susan Blackman. And I think this came in again for Joseph at the beginning, but probably applies to both Joseph and Mandy. So quick response to that. Cost analysis of environmental measures and ROI.
Sure, yeah, we do, yeah, and we do share. It's hard to collect all that data and put it into usable form from time to time, but it's, you know, important to track. How does it compare with others in the industry? You know, in general, that information isn't always available, but it does motivate others. I think there was another question in here about how we share this information. You know, we put out a press release when we achieved True Zero Waste certification. We were very proud of it, and our industry competitors took notice, and that was great. And that's what I wanted to see happen. I want Clover and Organic Valley and all the other organic dairy companies to take notice of what we're doing and feel the competitive pressure and then follow along, because we all need to move in this direction together.
Mandy, did you want to respond as well?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just add that, yes, we always do some type of ROI analysis. But I will say that, you know, often if we feel that it's the right decision and it may not have a very quick payoff or a payoff that most businesses would probably need to push a project through, we have moved forward with them because we do think it's the right thing, and we're able to do that. Again, as I mentioned, we're privately held, and that's a huge value there. So the hot rock composting machine is a really good example of that. 10 years ago, there's no incentives or rebates or funding to help businesses buy an in-vessel composting machine. that ROI, basically, it's never going to pay itself off. But we were very tired of sending food waste to the landfill, contributing to climate change, all of those things. So opted to move forward with that project anyway, even though it had a ridiculously long payback. So yes, we always do them. Most of the time, I would say they do make financial sense, because zero waste does make good sense for the bottom line. But there are times where we have not followed that. And in terms of the industry, craft beer there's a lot of opportunity for resource conservation, efficiency, zero waste in general. So I think craft beer in general is a little slightly ahead of the curve. I think our clientele, like beer drinkers and breweries, tend to think a little more sustainably, not all for sure, but I'd say the industry as a whole does a pretty good job. But yeah, when we do things or when our competitors do things, as Joseph said, it makes a difference when you have a certification or you kind of take that next level. Absolutely, it kind of helps raise all boats and people want to join. And
when you look at individual projects, are they considered as part of the whole of your budget? For example, we generally say eliminating wasteful practices saves the most money. When you implement an organics program, like you mentioned, that costs a significant investment, are you looking just at that project, or are you does Ken Grossman look at the total budget for the zero waste program and factor in the reductions as part of the benefit of that whole program?
For sure. I mean, I think so. We tried to, as someone who was advocating for that project, I did everything I could to make it, put all of those things in there: labor savings, reductions, the whole program. And so, when I say a ridiculously long payback, it was probably, I think if I remember correctly, it was like 20 or 25 years, right? Like most businesses aren't going to accept a payback for 20 years. But when you think about all those things that maybe we weren't able to monetize, it made sense, which is why we did it. We don't have food waste composting in our area. We still don't. And so frankly, we just felt that was just unacceptable to keep sending organic waste to the landfill. So I don't know if that's really answering your question, but it made sense for us even despite that longer financial payback.
Great. Next question, can you review the zero waste game as part of your employee onboarding training?
Yeah, so basically just goes through, we talk about what is zero waste, we talk about the hierarchy, we explain how recycling works. I think everyone probably on this panel and probably most people watching are shocked when people don't actually understand how recycling works, the system, where it goes, the MRF, why it's important to separate, why it's important to not commingle. So we talk about all of those things. We talk about the difference between your home recycling versus recycling at work at Sierra Nevada. And then we kind of go into what their role is at the brewery. So we really go into a deep dive of what do we mean by zero waste? How does the waste world work? It really opens people's minds to they think differently, before they throw something, because they really don't know what happens after that, after that initial toss.
Great. Claire, we have seen a lot more to-go packaging for food due to COVID-19. Do you have strategies to avoid the styrofoam clamshells?
Yes, definitely. Actually, here in New York City, styrofoam is banned. So it's actually really great to see that no takeout is in styrofoam clamshells, and they've all been on the disposable side, pretty much replaced by the bagasse, the sugarcane waste clamshells. But also we have some small delivery reusable services starting up. I know you have more of those in the Bay Area, but restaurants can use a reusable clamshell that then you can drop off back at any restaurant in the network, and that's obviously the best way to go if possible. But simple substitution, the bagasse, sugarcane waste, compostable ones.
Well, and the point about the bans, that the reduce, reuse, recycle is in that order for a reason. And so bans reduce and eliminate that is the best zero waste approach by rethinking, redesigning. That's really great. Next question is, are your zero waste multifamily residences going to be affordable housing units? If not, how can we bridge those gaps and make sustainable design accessible and affordable?
Well, the waste, the zero waste plan I'm working on now for a developer is actually for fully affordable and ex-homeless people, because it isn't really a gap, because it's not really more expensive to design for zero waste. You know, I mean, maybe some, if you're going to fully design all building materials to be totally disassembled, but lots of the little things like don't glue your carpet down. That's no more expensive to use tiles with the little tabs that can be swapped out than gluing carpet down. It's just a change in what you specify. And on the operational side, I mean, there's not a lot of cost benefit analysis, but giving the people who manage your waste enough storage space and making sure it makes sense for operations, that doesn't really cost much more. So yeah, I would say there is no gap. And another great thing in New York City is a lot of affordable housing are actually passive house now, and that was done as an incentive in the low income tax credits, so that actually many of them are really energy efficient too and higher quality.
I would probably also add that the Green Building Code, for example, in California, is a way of incorporating these types of design principles as requirements, and once they're required as standard building practice, that will make that apply to all types of construction. Next question.
Yeah,
next question is, how is the waste CO2 reused? Neil Shapiro is asking.
Yeah, great question. So we need CO2 for lots of different things: moving beer from tank to tank, pressurizing tanks, dispensing beer in the tap room. We need CO2 for a lot of things. You can't move beer with just air or oxygen. It has to have no oxygen, right? Or you're going to contaminate the beer. So we need CO2, honestly, for just moving beer around, pressurizing tanks, buffering tanks. So that's what we use CO2 for.
Great. How has COVID-19 impacted the great success of the food service area you have designed?
Who do you think that is for? I mean, I could talk about the food service infographic that Foodprint Group have taken.
I think it's for you, Claire. Fran McPoland,
yeah.
I think, posted at the point that you were giving your presentation.
Okay, so Foodprint Group, we actually worked with them to update that infographic for COVID, really looking at how businesses can reopen safely with reusables and what differences there need to be. And you can download that from their website, foodprintgroup.com, because businesses, small food service businesses are really struggling. So if you can do anything to help them reduce waste, it can save them costs as well. And they're used to doing, they're used to doing sanitary operations. So reusables are just as possible to be sanitary as disposables.
Great. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time. Our break is going to be starting in about 3 minutes. I need to go over a couple of details before that. So I'd like to now have a huge round of applause for Claire, Joseph, and Mandy for doing a fantastic job. And let's hear it in the chat. Let's see if anyone can communicate in the chat how you're feeling about their presentations. So with that, I'm going to just go over the next slide. Todd, if you can bring that up. So for the break from 10:30 to 11 Pacific, exhibitors will be on floors 1 and 2. We ask that you use the elevator on the left side of the screen. Just click on the another floor number in order to go to a different floor, and then say, yes, you want to go to a different floor, and you'll be magically transported there. The table topics will also be dispersed on both floors 1 and 2. With the when you come out of the presentation mode back to the exhibit hall floor, you may have been automatically placed at a exhibitor table or table topic. If you hadn't intended to visit with the exhibitor or that table topic, please move your avatar or icon to an empty table upstairs to floors 3 to 6 to network, or to park your avatar if you're actually going to leave the conference or your computer during the break, to make room for those wanting to join the exhibit tables or table topics. To do that quickly, please first move your avatar to an empty table. In some cases, the exhibitors haven't been able to get to their own tables because all the chairs are taken. So we'll be going by and asking people to allow the exhibitors to come into their tables, the same for the table topic speakers. So if you don't see an exhibitor at your table that's labeled for the exhibitor, and if you're at a table topic and there's no resource person speaker there to talk about that topic, please move on and encourage others to do so until we get the right people at the right tables. You can do this by double clicking your cursor over the table and chair you want to go to, and then to switch floors, go to the white elevator on the left-hand side of the screen, as I mentioned earlier. If you're looking for other people, you can find them by hovering your cursor over their avatars or icons, or search by their name in chat. At the end of the break, to keep talking, if you have a conversation you're right in the middle of and you want to finish it up, we actually have a banner on the side on the top right of the screen to, quote, jump to the networking room. That's what it's called, networking room. And that was set up so that you can continue those conversations you've been having while the presentations are going on. When we go into presentation mode, you've seen everyone is focused in this particular room on the screen. So that's it. We encourage you to move around, look for people you know, introduce yourself to people you don't, and if you don't see someone, check other floors or search in the chat or scan list of participants in the chat dashboard. So at the end of the break, when we start the next sessions, attendees and exhibitors can go to the networking room, and for tech support, look for volunteers or visit the help desk in the upper right-hand corner of the first floor. We're now going to the mid-morning break. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you again at 11.